Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Kenya's opposition boycotts the opening session of Parliament. It's presided over by President Uhuru Kenyatta after the Supreme Court cancelled the result of last month's presidential election, which saw him emerge victorious. He's now set for a rerun in October. Also, South Africa's President Jacob Zuma suffers a setback when a court rules that the election of a faction loyal to him in his home province 2 years ago was invalid. And we head to Ivory Coast, where with just a few weeks until the start of the academic year, thousands of students find themselves homeless and forced to sleep in lecture halls. It's after they were ordered closed by the government 6 years ago. But first, Kenyan politics continued to suffer from deepening divisions and friction on Tuesday. Opposition lawmakers boycotted the opening of Parliament. Supreme Court judges also stayed away from the session that was led by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, earlier this month, the court annulled his victory in last month's presidential poll. The country's electoral commission has set October 17th as the date for a new vote between Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga. During Tuesday's proceedings, Odinga held a rally in the Nairobi slum of Kibera and accused Kenyatta of having no authority to oversee the opening of Parliament.
We are telling Uhuru Kenyatta that he cannot threaten us. Today he has gone to open a 12th Parliament, yet he is the President of the 11th Parliament. A President of the 11th Parliament cannot open the 12th Parliament. The 12th Parliament is supposed to be opened by the President-elect of the 12th Parliament.
Odinga's threatened to boycott the October rerun date if the election commission isn't seriously overhauled. His National Super Alliance wants the election commission's CEO and several other officials sacked, and the Odinga's camp has blamed the electoral commission for bungling the original poll. While staying with Kenya, a ruling party lawmaker and a former opposition senator were freed on bail on Tuesday after having been arrested the day before and charged with hate speech. MP Moses Kuria and Johnson Mutam appeared in court accused of incitement to violence over speeches they have made over the past week. Now, a government body monitoring hate speech has said that it's seen a spike since the Supreme Court ruling. More than 3 times as many incidents were reported in the week following the ruling than during the whole 10-week election campaign preceding it. Now, at the opening of Parliament in Zimbabwe on Tuesday, President Robert Mugabe announced that the country had produced enough food to feed its people for the first time since adopting a controversial policy to strip land from white farmers. From the year 2000, hundreds of white farmers were evicted from farms, often violently, and land was handed to allies of the ruling ZANU-PF party. In many cases, they became neglected and unproductive. However, opposition politicians have accused Zuma, the 93-year-old leader, of having been overly optimistic about the state of the country's economy on Tuesday.
As usual, the speech did not really touch on the issues which really affect the people. At the present moment, I think everyone is aware of the liquidity crunch, everyone is aware of the poverty, and so on and so forth. And to hear the president making a reference to the economy being on the rebound, I'm not quite sure as to whether we are staying in the same country or we are staying in different countries. It looks like the president is a bit out of touch with reality.
Now, South Africa's president suffered a setback on Tuesday when a court ruled that the election of a faction loyal to him in his home province 2 years ago was invalid. The High Court ruling highlights growing rifts between Jacob Zuma's ruling African National Congress, the ANC, and could hamper his efforts to ensure that his wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, replaces him as party leader and perhaps even eventually as president. Now, KwaZulu-Natal province on the east coast of the country is Zuma's ancestral home and will also command the most votes at the ANC's national conference in December, when Zuma will step down as party chief. Now, Ashlyn Lang joins us now with more from Joburg. Ashlyn, will the court result today, Tuesday, have any real impact on the ANC's presidential vote in December?
I think it absolutely will. This is, as you say, a huge blow for the Zuma camp. KwaZulu-Natal is home to both Jacob Zuma and his former wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and they count on their greatest support from that base. It represents over 20% of the voting bloc that will go to the December conference. But with this ruling today, we could see a real sort of disarray in the leadership. The entire provincial leadership will now have to be disbanded and a new sort of elective conference arranged. Whether even that is possible to arrange before December, given the intense divisions within the province, remains to be seen. And if it can't be arranged, it could mean that KwaZulu-Natal can't send as many people to that elective conference. Equally, if it can be arranged, then potentially the former chairman of that province, who is a known ally of Cyril Ramaphosa, Dlamini Zuma's biggest rival, could then win. You know, he could then be his greatest backer when it goes to the December conference. So it's really incredibly significant. And we're seeing battles like this around the different regions in South Africa.
Now, the province has seen a number of political assassinations. Is there much to the ANC's claim that that's due to manipulation, as it's put it, by a third force?
No, I mean, most people have pretty much debunked that theory. We're seeing this increasingly from the ANC as it becomes increasingly beleaguered and challenged by corruption and impropriety scandals, that it attempts to deflect attention by blaming an external force. Jacob Zuma recently said that foreign forces had attempted to poison him because of his alliance with Russia, India and China and Brazil in a sort of economic grouping. We've seen Jacob Zuma and his allies trying to deflect attention from his close relationship with an Indian business family called the Guptas by saying that white monopoly capital is trying to stop any other business people getting involved with state tenders or any sort of capitalism within South Africa. What essentially it boils down to is, in a country where unemployment is incredibly high, a political job, even a councillor's job in these very rural regions, represents an absolute island in a sea of poverty, and therefore they are really hotly contested by rival factions and political groupings. And as we move towards the elective conference in December, it is so important to the main leaders of the party that they have backing that you just see that rivalry intensified and killings increase, unfortunately.
Thanks very much. Ashlyn Lang there for us in Johannesburg. Now, opposition lawmakers in Togo forced the adjournment of Parliament on Tuesday in protest at a constitutional reform bill having been left off the day's agenda. Now, this was despite days of anti-government protests. The president of the National Assembly agreed to suspend the extraordinary session as lawmakers had no say in setting the topic for debate. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Opposition supporters were unable to gather outside the Togolese parliament. Security forces were deployed around the building. Inside the assembly, the leader of the opposition criticised the fact that a constitutional reform bill was left off the day's agenda. The president of the assembly agreed to suspend the session. It will resume this Wednesday.
I would say they didn't have a choice. We would not have taken part in the debate, and if they had not accepted to listen to us, we would have simply left the room. It would not have been a good thing.
The ruling party of President Fagne Gnassingbe called for more dialogue.
It is in the nation's best interest that people talk to each other, that trust be rebuilt. We need to find a compromise, a consensus, so that the Togolese people can live in harmony. That is what is important.
Last week, hundreds of thousands of protesters gathered to call for a return to the 1992 constitution. It had been approved by 97% of the population. But it was amended several times by the current president's father, Gnassingbé Eyadema. He removed the limit on presidential mandates. Eyadema died in 2005 after having been in power for 38 years. His son Faure succeeded him. He was then re-elected twice, following controversial polls.
Well, in Abidjan, the start of the academic year is just around the corner, but thousands of students find themselves homeless and forced to sleep in corridors and lecture halls, as the halls of residence meant to house them are still inaccessible. They were ordered closed by the government 6 years ago. Our correspondents report.
These abandoned buildings, walls blackened by time, once housed several thousand students. This hall of residence is one of 10 campus buildings across Abidjan that's been abandoned since the end of the post-electoral crisis of 2011. After being occupied by armed groups and criminals, the buildings were meant to be renovated 6 years ago. Tired of waiting, a few members of the student union have taken matters into their own hands and begun the renovations themselves.
This room has been used as a toilet. You can see that people have urinated here. Renovating these halls help reduce the various social problems that students face. It's important to be in a peaceful setting where you sleep quietly to be able to achieve your goals.
Out of 15 halls of residence across Abidjan, only 5 are functional. At the end of each day, the routine is the same. Hundreds of students come to spend the night in the classrooms they attended during the day. Students like Jeanette, who live like refugees in the university, have been nicknamed Kosovars. For lack of facilities, the male and female student body use the same toilet.
It's not easy for a girl to wash here. Sometimes the toilets are clogged, so we have to go outside. It's difficult to go to the toilet outside.
A few meters away, this toilet's been turned into a bedroom. Kouadio, a medical student, has lived here for 5 years. The country's future high flyers forced to live in substandard housing, as the commute is too far and transport costs too expensive to live at home during their studies.
It hurts to sleep in a toilet while you have a room at home, but if you want to succeed tomorrow, you have to go through this first.
According to the main student union, the government's promise to build new halls of residence and to complete the refurbishment of the existing ones by the end of 2019.
That is some seriously impressive dedication to education there. That is, though, where I have to leave it. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again.